Hi there, my name is Manfred de Grotenhuis and I am a statistician. So I do work a lot with numbers. In that respect, one of the things that really stood out for me in the year 2016 were the presidential elections in the United States of America. As you may remember, most US polls wrongly predicted Hillary Clinton to win the elections. And the question I'd like to address today is, how on earth did that happen?
Now, before I'm going to answer the question as to why Hillary Clinton was wrongly predicted to become the next president of the United States, we have to realize that the polls did not do so bad at all. In fact, they predicted correctly the winner in no less than 46 states. Now, based on these figures, there is actually a neck-and-neck race going on between the two candidates. Out of all the electoral votes representing those 46 states, 231 electoral votes went to Donald Trump, whereas Hillary Clinton got 232 electoral votes to her name. So that is a pretty close race, considering the 46 states that were predicted correctly by the polls. Now, to become the next president of the United States, a candidate needs at least a minimum of 270 electoral votes. So it actually came down to winning another 40 votes from the remaining states that were predicted wrongly by the polls. So it came to a showdown in the following states: Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Florida, together holding 75 electoral votes. Now, what happened? Despite all the polls predicting Clinton to win, Trump won them all and became the new president of the United States. So the question is, what went wrong in the polls in those four states? So to answer the question, what went wrong in those four states, I used the state of Pennsylvania as an example. And looking at the state of Pennsylvania, with all its counties, it looks a little bit like a dartboard. So we start throwing darts at the map of Pennsylvania. And each time the dart hits the map, we are going to register what the person living on that exact spot actually voted on election day. Now, it is important to note that those darts were thrown blindfolded. So we have actually no idea where the darts are going to hit the map. And for people familiar with statistics, this means that we used a random sample from the population of people who actually voted in Pennsylvania. Now, in our study, we used 1,500 darts thrown at the map, and we registered the political party preference. And we repeated that 1 million times, not only for Pennsylvania, but also for Michigan, Wisconsin, and Florida. And out of all these 4 million trials, Trump was predicted to win the United States election 7 out of 10 times. Now, interestingly, the polls, however, predicted Clinton to win 7 out of 10 times. So there is something wrong with the assumption that the polls used the random samples. So we question the assumption that the darts were thrown blindfolded. Well, on the previous slide, we used random samples from American people living in Pennsylvania who actually voted on election day. This time we changed things, and we're going to use the strategy that polls used when they wanted to predict the outcome on election day. So there's a very important difference. We sampled from a population that actually voted during election day, while the polls are sampling from a population of people who say they are going to vote during election day. And that's a big difference, as we will see. Okay, well, the polls more or less used the principle of throwing darts as well. So here we go again. And each time the dart hits the map, the pollsters went to that exact spot and asked the person living there what he or she was going to vote on election day. Now, it is from a recent study done by APOR that we know that people did not reveal their Republican preference to the pollsters in some instances. So maybe the dart hit the map somewhere in Pennsylvania and the pollsters went to that spot and wanted to know the political party preference of that particular person, but they refused to give their Republican preference. We also know that the lower educated Americans tended not to participate in those surveys. So maybe the dart went to a spot where someone lived with a lower education, and that this person would refuse to participate in the polls. And the third thing is that Americans decided very late on their final preference, which turned out to be Republican. Well, taking into account this bias towards the Democrats, we again used this strategy of throwing 1,500 darts at the map of Pennsylvania, taking into account the little bias that occurred. I mean, the bias was not huge. It was about 1% bias. But if we use this little bias, out of these 4 million trials we did again in those 4 states, it turned out that Clinton was predicted to win the United States election 7 out of 10 times. So this is exactly in tune with what the polls actually found. So our simulations came with the exact same prediction as the polls did. But we used bias samples out of a population who was going to vote in Pennsylvania and the other 3 states. So the assumption that the polls used samples from a population that was representing the Democrats and the Republicans in a fair way, this assumption was most probably wrong.
So the main conclusion from our study, which I conducted with some other scientists from the United States and the Netherlands, is that the US polls used samples that were just a little bit biased towards the Democrats. And this little bias was only harmful in 4 states: in Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Florida. But those 4 states had a devastating effect on the overall outcome. And that is why the US polls predicted Hillary Clinton wrongly to be the next President of the United States of America. Well, end of story. Can I go now? Thanks.